Welcome to the Word for 2021. Today we're in 2 Samuel chapter 15. Now David has brought Absalom back home from Geshur. He was there for 3 years, but David doesn't fully reconcile with his son. For 2 years, Absalom is in Jerusalem, but David would not see him. During that time, Absalom's attitude towards his father deteriorates until his heart is filled with indifference, animosity, and contempt. So Absalom, he decides to orchestrate a coup to dethrone his father. This is what Absalom does. He undermines David by getting the people to believe that David really doesn't want to help them, but Absalom does. He actually turns the hearts of the people away from David onto himself. So after 4 years of putting this plan together, then he finally sends secret messengers to Hebron, and he tells all the tribes to have him proclaimed king over Hebron. Absalom even gets David's chief advisor, Ahithophel, to join him in the conspiracy. Well, after Absalom is proclaimed king, David, he loves Jerusalem and he loves the people, and he doesn't want a battle to be fought there in Jerusalem. So basically, David resigns and he leaves Jerusalem with a great entourage. As David is leaving, he also had the Ark of the Covenant go back to Jerusalem. And he said in verse 25, "If I have found favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see his dwelling place again." Now David knew that everything that was unfolding, it was part of God's judgment because of his sin with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah. But despite the consequences, David looked to God as his defender. David also, as we read this chapter, left some spies there in Jerusalem to let him know what Absalom planned on doing. And during all of this, God did frustrate the plans of David's enemies, and he used men to bring disaster upon Absalom. God used these spies to deliver David. Let me tell you the story of Eli Cohen. Now, Eli Cohen was an Israelite spy in the 1960s. Now, he was born in Egypt, he was raised in Argentina, and he then moved to Syria as a spy for Israel. The Syrian army had gathered together in the Golan Heights, which is the northern border of Israel, and they were going to attack. Eli Cohen, he had had his name changed and he lived there in Damascus. And while he was there in Damascus, he got very close to some people in the parliament of Damascus. He would get intelligence from them because, well, they thought that he was one of their own. But then he would use Morse code and he would send updates to Israel. At one point in the 1960s, there were 70,000 Syrian troops there on the Golan Heights. Now, the Golan Heights at that time was barren, it was a desert area, and it was hot. There was no shade and no cover for all of those soldiers. So Eli made this suggestion. He said, "Why don't you plant some trees, some eucalyptus trees?" Because eucalyptus trees, Israel has used them for years. They are very fast growing. They grow in clumps or clusters, and that will give shade to the troops. Well, that's what the Syrians did. They planted eucalyptus trees, and the soldiers, they were very happy for the shade, and all the troops congregated under the shade of those trees. Then later, Eli would send messages back to Israel, and he would say to them, "When you're firing on the Golan Heights, only target the clumps of eucalyptus trees. Don't fire anywhere else, but only target the eucalyptus trees." In just a matter of time, nearly all of the Syrian troops were destroyed. Unfortunately, Eli was captured and he was hung. You can read the story of Eli Cohen in a little book called Our Man from Damascus. God used a spy, Eli Cohen, to bring victory and protection for the nation of Israel. And God used the men that David had there in Jerusalem to bring victory for David too. David had put his trust and his reliance upon the Lord. We too, when we put our trust and reliance upon the Lord, we know that He will take us through very difficult situations. He will give us the strength we need to endure. And when we put our trust and reliance in the Lord, He will use ways that we would never consider using, but will bring glory to Him. And He will always work out His plans and His purposes in, through, and for us. So just like David, we too need to put our trust and reliance upon the Lord. Thank you for joining the Word for 2021.